Hey there, I'm Rachel Ehring, and you're listening to the Top Music Piano Podcast. Get inspired as we discuss creative resources, trends in piano pedagogy, ways to grow your income and streamline your studio, and new ways to engage your students each week. If you are a teacher who wants to go beyond the method books to create an innovative studio that fosters lifelong music makers, you've come to the right place. Hello, piano teachers. I am so grateful to you for joining me here today. When I finished recording the interview that you're about to hear, I thought, wow, that was a really special one. Helen has an incredible story of transformation that she shared with me. And if you or any of your students have ever had pain while playing the piano or suffered a piano-related injury, this episode is especially for you. Here's a little bit about my guest, Helen. Helen Aun is a leading expert in pianist injury prevention and peak performance. She is the founder of the Helen Aun Institute, a comprehensive training and rehabilitation program for pianists, combining the body-mind wisdom of the Alexander technique, the healing power of EFT tapping, the precision of efficient injury-free piano technique, and a deep journey of mindset transformation. Helen has developed a unique method that helps pianists unlock their full artistic potential. Helen has a degree in piano pedagogy and performance and over 25 years of piano teaching experience. She is a certified teacher of the Alexander technique, having studied at the Alexander Teacher Training School, one of the most prestigious schools in England, where she was later invited to return as a teacher trainer. Helen has held an Alexander technique teaching position at the Junior Guildhall School of Music and Drama in London, and she now trains pianists from all over the world. Her students range from the graduates of the Royal Academy to Juilliard. Helen is also an international speaker, giving lectures and workshops at various organizations globally. Here's my interview with Helen. Hi, Helen. Welcome to the show. I'm so happy that you are joining us today. Could you start by introducing yourself and tell us a little bit about your teaching and your business?
Sure. I'm really glad to be here talking to you today. Very excited about this talk. And I find that usually the topics that I'm talking about are not talked about enough. Basically, what I'm doing, working with musicians, pianists nowadays only, working with injuries and performance anxiety, often are topics that I think need a lot more attention and need a lot more talk. And people just need, I believe, to know about the tools for these things. So that's what I'm doing. I'm a pianist. I'm a professionally trained pianist. And I taught piano for a long time. And now I am focused on helping mostly professional pianists with things like physical injuries, performance anxiety, mindset issues. And I teach pianists and piano teachers through my institute, the Helen Aun Institute, which is an online training program. So I have students from all over the world.
Thank you. And can you tell listeners where you are located? Because I'm pretty sure you're my first guest ever from this part of the world.
So I'm located in Greece. I'm in Athens. And I'm here. I'm not from here, but I'm here now for 2 years. So I used to live in London before, and then before that I used to live in Finland, and I'm from Estonia. So it's a bit of a long journey here to Greece. But yes, we are now here because of family reasons. It's a beautiful place. It's a fantastic place to live, obviously.
Yeah, I wish I could fly over and do this interview in person. I want to visit Greece.
Why not? Why not? Maybe next one.
Yes. Before we dive a little more into your story and how you're helping pianists today, can you talk a little bit about Alexander technique? Because my understanding is that's kind of where you started and what your training was initially. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So
can you talk about what Alexander technique is for those who don't know?
Absolutely. So Alexander technique is, honestly speaking, one of the best tools that I know for musicians, for any kinds of performers, really. And obviously, that's why it's taught in so many music institutions around the world, because it helps people with the skills that they don't necessarily learn as part of their instrument training. When I'm talking about pianists, for example, we focus so much on technical training and learning repertoire, and we don't focus enough on the pianist themselves, the pianist itself. So I believe that this is a huge reason why I became injured myself, and which is obviously a reason why I went into Alexander technique training and did my training, because Alexander technique is one of the most comprehensive things to learn, to help with coordination, to help with understanding biomechanics, also understanding how to deal with stress better. So it teaches us how to deal with ourselves in the most optimal way. And it is for everybody. It's not just for musicians, but performers use it a lot for this reason, because we do some things at such a high level that we really need tools to be able to handle that pressure and handle that stress. And Alexander technique is really, really amazing for that.
Yeah, I think I read that it started in the theater. Is that right? With actors?
Yeah, Alexander was an actor, and he had this issue of losing his voice on stage, going hoarse on stage. So he needed to find out why it's happening, because nobody could help him. And he figured that he's actually doing things on stage. His body was taking certain shapes. He was pushing the voice out, which was causing the voice loss. And then he figured out how to coordinate himself in a way that didn't cause this issue. So his voice became quite amazing, actually. And he got quite famous for his voice. And people started coming to him asking, what do you do? How do you speak so freely? So he started teaching his discoveries. And then it became a separate thing. It became what we now know as Alexander technique.
Okay. Thank you for that little history lesson.
Mm-hmm.
Are you comfortable sharing a little more about your injury and how it led you to Alexander technique?
Absolutely. I know that a lot of pianists do not talk about their injuries much, because it can be quite a painful topic in many ways to share. But I find that the more we share about these things, people just feel like they're not alone with their problems, with their pain, with their injuries. So my injury started when I was really young, actually. I started having pain from age of 12, and I started having pain in my back first, and I couldn't practice without leaning back against the chair. So I literally started practicing on an office chair because I had to lean backwards. And then quite quickly, this became my first tendonitis at the age of 15. And once I was in the music college, I was literally just dealing with one pain after another. It felt like it's just moving around in my body. I had tendonitis in my both forearms. My wrists were really weak, and I had ganglion cysts. Do you know what ganglion cysts are? They are these bumps that they can form on the wrists, for example, and they are really painful. They sometimes go away on their own. Sometimes they need a surgery, but they are a sign of a repetitive strain injury, basically. And so I had these on and off, and lots of pain in my back and in my shoulders. And that lasted for about, the whole journey of having pain was about a decade at least, where I was just accepting that this is what's going on. This is who I am. Obviously trying to find answers, trying to find solutions, but never quite getting to the core of what was happening and why nobody could fix me. Everybody tried, and I saw so many professionals, chiropractors, osteopaths, doctors, hand surgeons, and everybody had an opinion of why I was aching, but nobody could really treat me to the point where the own problems would go away. So I was kind of stuck for a long time.
Yeah, that's a long time to be struggling and in pain at your instrument. So tell us how you found Alexander technique and how you found solutions.
I wasn't really looking at the beginning for these kind of solutions. I think I was looking for traditional solutions where I was hoping that somebody would come along and tell me what's wrong with me so I can be better. And at some point, I just started realizing that obviously it's not happening. I'm trying different things and just bouncing from one thing to another, and it's not happening. And I started realizing that, wait a minute, this is happening in my own body. These injuries are happening. This pain is happening in my body. Am I somehow causing this? Is there a possibility that I'm somehow contributing to this pain instead of just being unlucky and not having strong enough body, or just being unlucky with my physique? And that changed everything. That thought changed everything. And that's when I started researching. that's when I started looking for that information of how should I play the piano as not to hurt. And you know how they say when the student is ready, the teacher appears? This is exactly what happened. So very quickly after that, I found an Alexander Technique teacher by seeing an ad on the wall saying that there is a class for Alexander Technique for pianists. And starting to work with that teacher, immediately as I walked into the first lesson, I knew that this is something that I want to do. I knew that this is definitely something that's going to give me the answers that I have been looking for. And it was the case, for sure.
And how long did that take from when you first walked into that class to when you really started to feel better?
In some ways, the effects were immediate. I remember the first time I had my lesson and I walked out, I felt like a completely different person. I felt like I was floating. I felt light. And it was such a contrast to how I had been. And then when I took that to piano, it felt immediately very different. Playing like that, playing from that light state, from that joyful state, was very different. So in a way, some effects were absolutely immediate. And then obviously, when I actually enrolled in the training, which is a 3-year full-time training to become an Alexander teacher, that's where I really started looking at the principles, working with the principles, and then applying those to piano. And because Alexander Technique intrinsically doesn't have anything to do with music, or it has nothing to do with piano playing. So I just actively started looking for ways of applying it. And slowly, by the time I was performing, I started in September. My first actual performance was in December, and I had never felt that free on stage. Finally, I could breathe, I could perform, because I used to have a lot of performance anxiety as well as physical injuries. And I felt like that whole process of practicing for that performance was very different. And it felt physically very different. So oftentimes the effects are very quick in some ways. And as we continue, it just gets deeper and deeper and deeper. And new doors open in a way into deeper processes.
Can you take us back to that first class and tell us tactically, what were some of the changes that you made?
In that class, this was the very, very first class, I remember the teacher was talking me through how to actually sit down and stand up. So very simple things. And I thought, I know how to sit and stand. This is something I do every day. I know how to sit and stand. I know my posture is a little bit off, but I know how to sit and stand. But when she guided me up from that chair, it felt like I was doing nothing. It was a bizarre feeling of suddenly feeling like all my muscles stopped working and I just somehow flew up from the chair and then going back to the chair. That feeling will never leave me, that lightness. And obviously she was talking to me about moving in certain ways, moving from the right joints, getting the neck to release. I had a lot of neck tension back then, and it all affected me in such a way that it was like magic. And the good thing about this magic is that it stays with you. Obviously, then you go back to your habits and you need this reinforcement, but it stays with you for a while. And I felt amazing during the lesson and after the lesson. It was a very, very, very powerful experience for me.
Yeah, and it sounds like it completely changed your life and the course of your life. So you did the Alexander Technique training, but now you're not necessarily training in Alexander Technique. Is that correct? You've kind of turned it into your own system. Can you talk a little about that?
Yeah. So basically, I went through the full 3-year training, and I actually then stayed in London and worked many years in the training school, training future Alexander teachers. So I was, but at the same time, I was constantly teaching piano. I was performing, I was practicing, and I was thinking, how can I apply this? How can I make things easier? How can I apply this to technique, to teaching? And slowly, obviously, not just Alexander Technique, because I'm kind of a curious nature, as many musicians are. I took influences from other things too, and started combining everything, especially injury-free piano technique, which is not really part of Alexander Technique as such, although we use Alexander principles in that. So I started combining that plus the emotional work and work on mindset and trauma and old experiences that I knew were still holding me back. I was just putting that all together, and that's what I teach nowadays. I teach pianists very holistically, not just in Alexander technique, but I also combine the actual piano technical training. And we talk a lot about the emotional side of being in this industry, all that I'm not good enough, I don't thrive on stage, I feel pressure, I feel stress. All of these things affect how we can function. And so I bring all of that to this training. And I have created a step-by-step method towards finding more balance and ease and control in a way of ourselves physically and also emotionally and mentally.
Yeah, and I want to get into the emotional part of it in a few minutes here. I know that could be a whole episode on its own, but I want to talk first a little about the physical. What are some of the mistakes that you see pianists making physically as they're playing the piano?
There are obviously a lot of things that come to play, but I think that we can all agree that we carry a lot of tension in our body in daily life outside the piano playing anyway. And all of us move a little differently, so we all have our own quirks and our own habits, and we then bring those to the instrument. And because piano playing is such a repetitive activity, we end up repeating the patterns, so they become so ingrained that we don't even realize anymore that we could be doing something differently. How we play becomes so natural that we don't necessarily recognize that this is the way to play that is going to lead to an injury, because that's the only way we know how to move. And it can be one of the reasons, for example, is that I think that piano players are not looking at technique from a whole body perspective. We often focus just on the hands and the fingers, sometimes also on the upper arms, but the rest of the body goes unnoticed. And because everything is connected, when we hold tension in the pelvis, when we hold tension in the lower back, when we hold tension in the legs, it will affect our upper body. And at the same time, when we have injuries in the wrists and in the arms, in the forearms, some of these can stem from the neck area. So the connections are often missing, I believe. Pianists just don't make those connections between where the symptom is and where the actual core reason is. And another really big issue is that teachers lack the training to actually fix those problems before they become an issue, which means that bad habits are repeated year after year until body just gives up. And often under pressure, after deadlines of years and years of that stress in a way of this profession, we can just break. And anybody and any machine would break if we use it against its design, right?
Yeah. Oh, wow. That's so good. So I want to talk a little bit to those teachers who are teaching the little ones. What can they do in those beginning piano lessons to help prevent this in the future?
Well, the first thing is obviously having as much training in these things as possible. Because I certainly have to admit, when I was a new teacher, I graduated from the music college that should have prepared me for all these things. I actually didn't have much understanding of what I should be teaching. And that's basically how I see a lot of people start out. They, depending on who was teaching them, they just lack that deeper understanding of how the body is supposed to move, which means that when the student is there, and especially if it's a child, and we have to be able to translate all of this to the child's language, we lack the tools, we lack the words, we lack the methodology. And so that's the first thing I think that what teachers could do is to train in understanding what it means to coordinate themselves well. And then obviously that then moves on to the teaching as well. And another thing is that children actually are naturally, up until about age 7, poised. And they have if we think of the whole body perspective, they have the posture. They can teach us so many things. I'm looking at my 2-year-old and my 5-year-old, and their body use is just beautiful. So in a way, our job as teachers is not to mess that up, to preserve what's already there. And we can mess it up by causing situations where the student feels stress, so they contract, where they suddenly have to play a repertoire that they are not ready for, so the tension creeps in. So we have to be very mindful as teachers of how we build that student. It's very individual, student to student, obviously. Another thing, obviously, is that teaching hand position should be something that teachers know about, and they wouldn't teach certain traditional methods of hand position that will cause problems later on, such as curving fingers. When we curve fingers, we immediately build tension. So there are better ways to do that. And obviously, we could go on and on about this. And this is what I teach as a step-by-step process in the Institute. So there's a lot of layers to this. But just to put it out there, it's important to know what can cause injuries and then train and have that step-by-step methodology, basically.
So in the Institute, are you teaching teachers how to teach proper technique? Is that part of it?
It is part of it. And the way I'm teaching teachers is I'm teaching them to have proper technique first. And then obviously we talk a lot about how could I pass this on to the student, different ages of students, different levels of students, and then they can pass it on. If we don't internalize something in our own body, it's very hard to teach it effectively. And so my way of training is always through the teacher first, and then that passes on naturally to the student too. Yes.
So I do want to spend a little time talking about the emotional and anxiety side of it, performance anxiety. What tips do you have for teachers who are training students to perform, whether it's recitals, competitions, whatever? Sometimes, I'll be honest, sometimes with my little ones, I don't even want to bring it up because I'm thinking they seem so confident. Maybe they're not nervous. I don't want to put it in their head. But what advice do you have for teachers?
I think in a way you're right. And I don't know if you agree with me, but in a way, in some ways, I feel like performance anxiety is a learned fear. And we learn it through our own experiences and we learn it through watching others. So it doesn't necessarily even have to be our own experience. We just observe others. And if we see anxiety, if we see stress, we think, okay, I should be stressed in this situation. So very young students, like you say, often don't need that management, that stress management at all. They just need to feel the joy from the teacher towards that particular performance. So like I said, with the technique, there are a lot of teachers that I believe carry a lot of scars around performing within themselves, which means that unknowingly, without wanting it, they might pass on some of that insecurity through their language, maybe through over preparing the student, through all kinds of things that we mean well, but actually we have some stress within us already, and the student's subconscious mind picks that up. So if we want to truly allow our students to feel the joy of performing, we should feel that joy first. And we should be able to talk about the performing as if it's a joyful event. The way we use words around performing really matters, so that we don't build that pressure. We don't, obviously, this shouldn't even be a thing to say, but if we have very high expectations of the student and the student knows it and feels the pressure, this can immediately build that stress. So we know as teachers that we have to keep that balance of demanding things from our students, but also at the same time allowing them to feel loved and cared for and accepted. I didn't come from that culture. I came from a culture of a lot of stress. I came from the very much Soviet influenced culture where the teachers were very harsh. And I believe that sits at the core of my performance anxiety. At very young age, I learned that I have to be perfect on stage. Otherwise, I will be a disappointment. And we have to catch ourselves as teachers from these, because I think that still to this day, there are teachers who feel like the student can let them down. And obviously that creates a lot of pressure on the students. And so I really think that the teachers should be clear in their own heads about what performing means to them. And then with older students, we should talk about these things. we should talk about the fact that being on stage doesn't feel like being in a practice room. Adrenaline will kick in and you will feel different. So it doesn't throw you, that it's actually a power, a superpower, instead of something to be afraid of, etc. All these things should be addressed. And especially if a student, let's say, underperforms, makes mistakes and feels upset about it, I think then we should also be able to go and address that with that student, and not just brush it off. Oh, you'll be fine next time. Just to address, that's okay. These things happen, and let's build a strategy of moving on, etc., so that we are there supporting them.
Yeah, this is so important. I could talk about this for a long time. I think it's really sad, and I think we do a disservice to our students. We've made this thing that should be so beautiful, music, sharing our music, and we've turned it into this like harsh thing where, you can't make a mistake. You have to be perfect. And so one of the things I like to do, especially for recitals, I know it's a little different in competition, but focusing on just sharing the music with your audience. These are people who love you. They're here to hear beautiful music. And that's your job, is share the music. They're not going to care if you miss a note or forget a word or whatever. Like, it's about the music and sharing something that's so beautiful with your audience.
And when we can pass that on to the students, and obviously to their families as well, we give them a massive gift of confidence for the rest of their lives. So there is a plus side, a huge plus side to doing these events and having people perform, because they can see what they're made of, and they can feel that joy and that sharing. Because honestly, if I think of anything in my life that I have done, the performances that have gone well are way up there when it comes to the high I feel afterwards and the happiness I feel afterwards. I don't think there's anything as addictive and as amazing as being on stage and feeling that joy and feeling that flow, and you come off and you feel like flying. So isn't it amazing that we can pass that on to our students too?
Yeah. And I bet it's the performances where you were emotionally connected with the music. It's probably not the performances where you played every note perfectly. It was technically 100%. It was that feeling, that emotion where you were sharing beautiful music, whether you missed a note or not, is my guess.
Exactly. And this flow state is something you can't control. It will happen or it won't. But when we create conditions for it, like I just said, when we create conditions in every lesson, and then through that joy, it's much easier for the students also to enter that state and to feel that joy instead of feeling the fear and the insecurity.
So I would love for you to talk a little about your institute and how you work with pianists, and maybe share a success story of one of your students who's worked with you inside of your institute.
The way I started when I was in trouble, there wasn't really anything like this out there. That's what I wanted to say. So I went down the classic route of becoming an Alexander teacher first, then obviously at the same time combining all these things with piano, and then slowly teaching it to more and more people, and nowadays working with professionals mostly. So I always had this thing at the back of my mind that I want to create something where people can get this information directly without needing to take 3 years out of their lives and pay a lot of money for an Alexander Technique training, which obviously is an amazing training, but it is a life change. And I felt like many pianists and many piano teachers don't need that level of life change and learning. They just need the tools to be able to teach these things to their students, and obviously to utilize it themselves as well. So this is what I wanted to create, and this is what I've created. And what happens in the Institute is, like I said, it's online so that people can access it from all over the world, which is the case. We have a lot of people from all continents, all time zones. And I have different levels in the training, because obviously, as we know, like in piano playing, it takes time. And the way this works is you go deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. So people can finish a level and then move on to the next level and then move on to the next level. And the way I teach is I start people off the instrument, actually, so that we make sure that those tensions that are there in everyday movement can start slowly melting away. And then once we know how to move in a little bit of a more graceful and easy and flowy way outside the piano, then we start applying all of this ease to actual piano playing. But we talk a lot about technique. We talk a lot about mindset. Everything is connected. So that's why nothing is left out in a way, because I feel like everything has to be there. And by the time people move on to higher levels, we also have performance classes, so that especially those who have always felt like they are not performers, they can't perform, can then put these tools in practice, and they can, in a loving environment, start feeling good about themselves as performers.
Great. So if listeners want to learn more and get in touch with you, where can they find you?
They can find me on my website, which is helenaun.com.
Do you want to spell your name so they can?
Helenaun, Helen Aun. So in Estonia, we just pronounce it as we write it, all the letters. I have a lot of information about the Institute on the website, and about me as well, and my story is there. And the best way, because obviously everybody is an individual, everybody comes from a different point of view. What I like to do is, people who are interested in training, I actually like to talk to them beforehand. So the best way to get in touch and to see whether this is something that could serve you best and could be something for you is to book a completely free of charge consultation with me. There is a link on my website for that call, and that's usually the best first step towards exploring whether this is something that we could do together.
Great. Thank you so much. Helen, this has been so fun talking to you. I've learned a lot, and I know that our listeners are going to learn a lot from this episode as well. Thank you so much for giving your time and being here and sharing with us today.
Thank you, Rachel. It's been a huge pleasure, and I hope to see you in Greece.
Thank you. I hope to come and visit. I hope you enjoyed getting to know Helen today and hearing about her wellness journey. I know that she would love to hear from you if you want to connect with her or check out any of her resources. This episode is part of our ongoing topic about whole body learning, and we have a course coming up at Top Music called Whole Body Learning with Paul Myatt. This is going to be a fantastic course that will be held in August, but we're doing a promo right now with early bird pricing until July 8th. So if you're listening to this before July 8th, 2024, head over to topmusic.co/wholebody to check out the special pricing offer. That's the end of the show for this week. On next week's podcast, we're going to be starting our business topic, which I personally am really looking forward to. I know that I'm going to learn a lot. And my first guest is someone that you might be familiar with from her podcast, Music Studio Startup. I'll be speaking with Andrea Miller about setting your rates, which is always a hot topic among piano teachers. So be sure to join me for that conversation next week. I'm Rachel Ehring, and you've been listening to the Top Music Piano Podcast. Speak to you next time.
How do you keep up to date with all the latest trends and research into music education? How do you connect with other teachers around the world and make sure your teaching stays fresh and relevant for students of all ages and stages, both now and into the future? I created our Top Music Pro membership to be the one-stop shop for music teaching resources, training, support and community, and I'd love for you to come and join us inside. With over 40 comprehensive training courses, hundreds of teaching demonstrations and lesson plans, free monthly sheet music, discounts and all the business and pedagogy support you could ever need, Top Music Pro is the community you've been looking for. If you're ready to level up your learning from the podcast and join thousands of other teachers in our global network, head over to topmusicpro.com today.